that what? Is that when you have something that was combined and had a status, then you divide it, has a lower status, and then you recombine it, ultimately again has a heightened status. So the Gemara says, so Rava ultimately again is going ahead and using this as a right. Remember again, Rava holds that if you have kavana for a half a kizayis of chutz lizmano, half a kizayis of chutz limkomo, and another half a kizayis of chutz lizmano, Rava says those two half kizesim form together to what? To form a kizayis ultimately of pigul and make the carbon into pigul. Why? Because he says the second kizayis essentially awakens the first kizayis to form a kizayis of pigul. Rava says, where do I know that from? I know that from this case. If you have a beitza's worth of food, which is a rishon, that combines, when you separate that combination, that mixture, then they each become a sheni. If you recombine it, then what? It becomes a rishon. So you see that when you have items in their divided state of a lower status and you recombine them, they have a heightened status. So too, if you have a half a kizayis of pigul, or I should say half a kizayis of chutz lizmano, half a kizayis chutz limkomo, another half a kizayis of chutz lizmano, those two half kizayisim of chutz lizmano can what? Could combine together to form a pigul status. For Rav Hamnuna will say, Rav Hamnuna Amar, you can't compare the cases, and I'll tell you why. Hasam ikashira. But say in the case, ultimately again, in the case that you just mentioned, where you have the kibetza of Rishon and the kibetza of Sheni Rabosei, the reason why that mixture becomes a Rishon, and even if it's divided, it becomes a Sheni, but once you recombine it, ultimately it becomes a Rishon, that's because there you have a total requisite shear. So we'll say, in that case, what are you dealing with? You're dealing with a complete kibetza, complete betza, ultimately again, of Rishon food. When you're dealing with a complete shear, that changes everything. Hacha lekashira. Both say in this particular case over here, you're dealing with a situation where what? You do not have the requisite shear. You're dealing over here with where you have half kizesim ultimately again of, you have half kizesim of, half kizesim of chutz lizmano kavanos. So the Gemara says, Amar Rav Hamnuna, Menamina. So Rav Hamnuna says, where do I know from? So again, remember, we're dealing with the machlokes, Rava and Rav Hamnuna, in a very specific case. This is a situation where a person has kavana for a half a kizayis of carbon, of carbon. First half a kizayis, chutz lizmano. Second half a kizayis, chutz limkomo. Third half a kizayis, chutz lizmano. Rava says, the two half kizesim form together to what? To form a kizayis of pigul, the carbon is pigul, and your chayiv karis if you consume it. Rav Hamnuna says, no. These half kizesim do not go ahead and, for the carbonic process, where you have multiple mindsets. What happens when you have multiple disqualifying mindsets? What happens? The carbon becomes pasul, but not pigul. So Rav Hamnuna says, Menamina, where do I know my position from? Disnan, because we learned ha'ochel shenitma ba'avatoma. So we'll say, so now listen to this case. This is, if you look at Rashi, it's Rashi hachi garsinon. It's Rashi hamaskel aval hacha, but it's in the middle of the Rashi, the hey gimel, hachi garsinon. See, here's the case. Hachi garsinon, ha'ochel chatzi beitza, shenitma ba'avatoma. We'll say, if a person goes ahead and eats a half a kibetza's worth of food that became tameh with an avatoma, v'chatzi beitza acheres shenitma bivlad hatoma, and then another half a kibetza of food that became tameh with avlad hatoma. So also remember again, avatoma is the highest form of tuma, one of the highest forms of tuma. Vlad hatoma is a secondary form of tuma. So we'll say, what's the halacha? Mitztarfim ze im ze l'tameh b'kal shebishneim. Ultimately, again, when I say what happens, they go ahead and they go ahead and combine with one another, l'tamei b'kal shebishneim, to ultimately again to form the lower level of tumah. Ultimately, again, I should say read that differently. Mitzarfim zemzeh, they combine with one another. L'tamei b'kal shebishneim. I will say when they combine their status is of the lower of the two. So in this case, the combined status of the half a beitza of the avatoma together with the half a beitza of the vlad hatoma form together a beitza of food that is a vlad hatoma, the lower level of tuma. Rashi says, "My love afagav the hadr malye." So all right, so we'll say, so watch this. So ochel, so this is Rav Hamnuna's shita. So this is not an ochel shenitma ba'avatoma. We'll say if you have a half a beitza of food that is tummy the status of an avatoma, v'shenitma. Ha'ocha shenitma ba'avatoma, v'shenitma bevlat hatoma. So we'll say, what's the halacha? Mitzvah, important halacha, according to Rav Hamnuna. If you have half a beitza of food that is an avatoma, that combines with a half a beitza of food that is bikal shebishnehem. And I will say, what happens? They go ahead and they combine together to form a beitza's worth of food. But what's the status of that beitza? It is the lower of the two tumas. So in this case, it would be a vlara tuma. My love, afagav, the hadar malye. And I will say, is that not true that they are considered to be a lower form of tuma, even if what? Even if you separate them and subsequently recombine them. So we'll say, what do you see from here? You see from here that when you have multiple items, right? Multiple items that have their own individual statuses. And what happens? You combine them, the collective group only takes on the status of what? Of the lowest level of the, I should say, they only take on the status of, it takes on the lowest common denominator, we'll call it. Sefer from Nuna says in this case as well, when you have a half a kizayis of chutz lizmano, half a kizayis of chutz limkomo, another half a kizayis of what? Chutz lizmano. Even though again you have two kizayisim of chutz lizmano, the combined mixture only takes on the lowest common denominator, which in this case will be what? Chutz limkomo, which only makes the carbon pasul, but not pigol. Maybe not. Maybe at the end of the day, we're talking about a case where you're not recombining these mixtures. Because you're not recombining these mixtures, that's why ultimately, again, the individual parts only take on the lowest common denominator. Okay. Case we'll say the point the Gemara is making over here is that there's lav dafka right to Rav Hamnuna's position. Ki asa Rav Dimi Amar. So we'll say when Rav Dimi came along, he said as follows. Ki asa Rav Dimi Amar, Chatzi zayis chutz limkomo. We'll also listen to this case. So Rav Dimi now is introducing a different case. Remember, the machlokes Rava and Rav Hamnuna is a half a kizayis chutz lizmano, half a kizayis chutz limkomo, half a kizayis chutz lizmano. So Rava says, and make the carbon what? Pigol. Rav Hamnuna says they do not combine, rather it's Eruv Machshavas, you have multiple disqualifying mindsets, which makes the carbon pasul, but not pigol. Kias Rav Dimi Amar, so also when Rav Dimi came along, he said, Chatzi zayis chutz limkomo, v'chatzi zayis chutz lizmano, v'chatzi zayis chutz lizmano. Half a kizayis chutz lizmano, and half a kizayis chutz lizmano. So we'll say, see what's different in this case? In this case, you have two half kizaysim, but what? They're right next to each other. So it's half a kizayis chutz limkomo, then half a kizayis chutz lizmano, half a kizayis chutz lizmano. So we'll say, as opposed to in the first case, where the two half kizaysim chutz lizmano are separated in the middle by what? A half a kizayis chutz limkomo. Here, they are right next to each other. So what ultimately, again, is the status of this particular carbon? So Tani Bar Kafra, pigol. So Bar Kafra says, this seems to be a paradigmatic case, well, not a paradigmatic case, but this seems to be a case of pigol. Why? They will say, the fact that you had kavana for a half a kizayis ultimately, again, of chutz lim komo in the beginning, does not take away from the fact that you had kavana for two half kizesim of chutz lim komo right next to each other. Therefore, effectively, you have carbon pigol. Ki also Ravin Amar. When Ravin came along, he said, Chatzi zayis chutz lizmano, the chatzi zayis, half a kizayis chutz lizmano, half a kizayis chutz lizmano, and then half a kizayis chutz lim komo. So we'll say this is just the reverse of the previous case. In the previous case, the half a kizayis chutz lim komo was first, and the two half kizesim of chutz lizmano were second. Here, the two half kizesim of chutz lizmano are first, and the half kizayis of chutz limkomo is last. Tani bar kafra pigul. So bar kafra will say it seems to be the same thing. This case will also be pigul. Why? Because they will say a half a kizayis ultimately a kizayis. So we'll say what you seem to be seeing over here is as follows: the machlokes Rava and Rav Hamnuna really only comes about to saying which kind of case, where the two half kizesim of chutz lizmano were interrupted by a half a kizayis chutz lim komo. That's the machlokes case. But where the two half kizesim of chutz lizmano are next to each other, then whether or not again they come before the half a kizayis of chutz lim komo or after the half kizayis of chutz lim komo doesn't seem to matter all that much. It seems to be everyone will agree that the two half kizayis ultimately again will combine with each other to form a kizayis of pigul. Ravashi masni hachi. Ravashi mano will say if you have a half a kizayis ultimately again chutz lizmano ukizayis chasyav chutz lim komo. So we'll say Ravashi has the following: if you have a half a kizayis outside of the prescribed time, chutz lizmano, and kizayis, and then I will say, watch this. Then you have one whole kizayis, chatziyav chutz lim komo, the chatziyav chutz lizmano. We'll say here this interesting case, right? So in this case over here, Ravashi has as follows: I have a half a kizayis chutz lizmano, okay? Then I have in mind for a kizayis, but in that kizayis, my kavanah is what I was saying: chatziyav chutz lim komo and chatziyav chutz lizmano. So we'll say in that whole kizayis, I now have two kavanas for the half kizayisim. One chutz lim komo and one chutz lizmano. So we'll say, what's the status over here? It's actually very interesting cases. Tani bar kafra says pigul. This is still a case of pigul. Why? Ein chatzi zayis moil b'makom kizayis. So we'll say, Rav bar kafra still seems to say, bottom line of us, what we look is at the end of the day, do you have a kizayis of pigul or not? If you have a kizayis of pigul, I will say, then the carbon will be pigul. The fact that you're subdividing the half a kizayisim like this, according to Bar Kafra, doesn't seem to make all that much of a difference. Rabbi Yanai says as well. So listen to this interesting case. Chishev sheochlu kilavim lemachar. But so what happens if when a person is shacking the carbon or doing any of the avodas, he has in mind that he's going to feed the carbon to his dogs tomorrow. So he's going to feed the carbon to his dogs tomorrow. So we'll say, what's happening over here? This is a machshavas pigul, but it's not, I don't have in mind to consume it. I have in mind that I'm going to give it to my animal. So the shay that I will say is, does such a machshava ultimately constitute a machshavas pigul or not? To which the Gemara answers, pigul. In fact, this is pigul. Why is it pigul? I will say, Dichsiv ve'es izevel yochlu akilovim v'chilek Yisrael. Because I will say, ultimately again, the Navi, when foreshadowing the punishment of Izevel, the wife of Achav says that she's going to be eaten by the dogs in the Yisrael Valley. So we'll say, so interestingly enough, what does that mean? So you see from here that what? You see from here that halacha l'maisa, consumption by dogs is called achila. So we'll say, what the Gemara is saying is as follows, something quite interesting. The prohibition of pigul is that a carbon is not permitted to be consumed outside of its prescribed time. I should say differently. The prohibition of pigul is that a person can't have kavana to consume the carbon outside of the prescribed time. What Rabbi Yanai is now coming along and saying is as follows: that any bona fide form of consumption, so ultimately again can result in the prohibition of pigul. What Rabbi Yanai is, because the Navi uses the lashon of achila by dogs. Therefore, if one has in mind when doing any one of the avodas that I'm going to have the carbon consumed by my dogs outside of the prescribed time, good morning, Mr. Schoenfeld, outside of the prescribed time, then halacha l'maisa, that it constitutes a pigul prohibition. Incredible. Maskef Rabbi Ami. So Rabbi Ami says as follows, but 1 second, Ela me'ata, using this logic, chishev shetachlu eish lemachar. So we'll say, what happens if a person has in mind that, you know what, I'm going to have my carbon consumed by fire. I'm going to burn my carbon outside of the prescribed time. Now by ish, by fire, the Torah also hachanami the pigul. So we'll say if a person has in mind that I'm going to go ahead and burn my carbon outside of the prescribed time, so you're going to tell me that's going to be pigul. Also, the Torah uses the lashon of, the Navi uses the lashon of achila. So we'll say, well, what the Gemara's question is as follows. So, Rabbi Yana, you're trying to tell me now that any time the Torah, there's an issue, or I should say, there's a prohibition to consume, to have a machshava, to consume the carbon outside of the prescribed time. Now what you're telling me is any time the Torah uses, or when say Tanakh uses, the lashon of achila, so ultimately again that could result in pigul. Therefore, if I have in mind to feed my carbon to my dogs outside of the prescribed time, that could result in pigul. Well, using that logic, if I have in mind to go ahead and burn the carbon outside of the prescribed time, that should also result in pigul. Why? Because the Navi uses the lashon of achila by ish as well. To which the Gemara says, "V'chitei mahachinami." Maybe you'll say, yes, indeed, that is true. If you indeed have in mind to burn the carbon outside of the prescribed time, then halacha l'maisa that could result in pigul as well. Well, that's not true. V'hatnan lechol kichatzi zayis ulahaktir kichatzi zayis kasher shein achila v'haktara mitzdarfin. But we'll say, what did we learn in the Mishnah? We learned in the Mishnah that you have kavana to go ahead and consume a half a kizayis outside of the prescribed time, and you have kavana to burn half a kizayis outside of the prescribed time. That's what Rabbi say. Those two half kizayis do not combine to form a pigul prohibition. It's puzzle. It combines ultimately again to form a psul, but not pigul. To which the Gemara says, you're right. So the Gemara says, she'ein achila v'aktara mitzdarfin, because achila, consumption, and burning do not combine. So we'll say, what do you see from here? You see from here that even though the Navi uses the lashon of achila, ultimately again by burning, that does not constitute a pigul prohibition. To which the Gemara says, you're right. Ida'afka b'lashon achila hachanami. So we'll say the truth is, if you go ahead and you use the lashon of achila by burning, then einachinami that could result in a pigul prohibition. Or as we'll say, it's all about how you phrase it. If you go ahead and you say you have in mind that the fires are going to eat your carbon after the prescribed time, you use lashon achila, then einachinami that could result in a prohibition of pigul. What's happening over here? Se'ida'afka b'lashon achila hachinami. Hacham asking, I will say, what's the case of the Mishnah? Da'afka b'lashon haktara. But I will say, ultimately again, a person uses a lashon of burning. The lashon achila l'chud, the lashon haktara l'chud. So this is actually a very fascinating halacha. The Gemara seems to be telling me as follows: everything depends on the verbiage I use. If I refer to fire as burning, then ultimately again it cannot create a pigul prohibition. But if I refer to the fire as what? As consumption, as achila, then in fact it can result ultimately in the pigul prohibition. By Rav Ashi. So we'll see Rav Ashi. So first of all, so interestingly enough, by the way, Rabbi Yanai's original assertion does hold true, which is that if a person has in mind that his dogs are going to go ahead and consume the carbon after the prescribed time, that einachinami that can result in the pigul prohibition. Okay, so by Rav Ashi, chishev le'achol kizayis b'shnei b'nei adam bahu. What's the interesting case? Let's say when doing one of the, I have in mind that a kizayis of this carbon is going to be in mind that I'm going to go ahead and give a kizayis of the sacrificial meat to be consumed by two people in 3 days from now. So we'll say, so the shaila is what? Does that create pigul or not? So mahu, basar machshava azlinon di'ika shiura, or basar ochlin azlinon v'leka shiura. So we'll say, do we go basar the machshava? And the machshava is what? That a kizayis of this carbon is going to be consumed outside of the prescribed time. That makes it say pigul. Or do we go basar achila? And basar achila is that what? Each person is only going to be consuming what? A half a kizayis. Now a half a kizayis is not pigul. Only kizayis. So both say interesting shayla. So do we look at the machshava? And my machshava is ultimately again that a kizayis of carbon is going to be eaten outside of the prescribed time. That's pigul. Or do we look at the parties involved? And it's going to be consumed by two people, each of which is only going to consume a half a kizayis, which is not the shir of pigul. So Amar Abaye says Tashma. So let's analyze this. Le'echol kechatzi zayis ulahaktir kechatzi zayis kosher. So let's remember again. What did the Mishnah say? The Mishnah said that if I go ahead of us and I have in mind that half a kizayis is going to be eaten outside of the prescribed time, and half a kizayis is going to be burned. So we'll say, what's the halacha? Kosher. She'ein achila v'aktar. We'll say, when we say kosher, kosher means that ultimately, again, the carbon doesn't become pigul. Why not? Because achila and haktara, consumption and burning, do not form together to form a prohibited kizayis. So we'll say, Amud Beis. Ha, what can you infer from here? Ha, le'echol v'le'echol, dumya de le'echol v'hakdir. I will say, but what do you see from here? You see from here that if you have a case of achila and achila, which can be comparable to a case of achila and haktara, ultimately again would be prohibited. We'll say, what's that case? Vehechi dami, bishnei adam, bishnei b'nei adam. We'll say, ultimately again, I could say it's the case of two people. Look at Rashi. Ha le'echol v'le'echol, l'shnayim, dumya de le'echol ulahaktir, she'ein zayshan. So we'll say, see, the reason why the case of achila and haktara don't combine is why? Because they're two different processes. But I will say, when you have two similar processes, you see from here that what? They can combine. What's the case of two similar processes which can combine? One kizayis to two people. That I will say, if I have kavana, ultimately again, that a kizayis of the carbon is going to be consumed outside of the prescribed time, but it's going to be eaten by two people. So each person is going to eat half a kizayis. Ultimately, again, what I will say, they are mitzdarif. Shmamina, indeed, this is the case. So we'll say, so Allah Lamaisa, that is indeed the case, that if I have kavana for one kezayis of sacrificial meat to be consumed by two people outside of the prescribed time, even though what? Each of them, in essence, is going to only consume half a kezayis. We go basar machshava, we go after what my intent was. My intent is that a kezayis of sacrificial meat is going to be consumed after the prescribed time, and therefore Allah Lamaisa, the carbon becomes pigul. Incredible. Next case. Bay Rava. Chishev le'echol kizayis biyaser michdei achilas pras mahu. Bo said this is another fascinating case. Bo said, what's this case over here? This case is, I have in mind that a kizayis of carbon is going to be consumed. Yes, now understand. It's a very important halacha. Look at Rashi for just a moment. Second line down from the top. Lahashos bein tchilas achilaso l'sofa. So listen to this case. Under normal circumstances, I will say, when you eat something, if you eat something over a prolonged period of time, in order for that eating to constitute one cohesive act of consumption, the act of consumption has to occur within some time frame. That time frame is what we call kedei achilas pras, which literally means the time it takes to what? Pras means a half. The time that it takes to eat half a loaf. Time that it takes to eat half a loaf. So I will say, so the Gemara says, so how long is that shear? So it says that's a major machlokes aposkim. That's ultimately again anywhere from between 2 minutes to 9 minutes, even some shitos 18 minutes. Okay, whatever the amount of time frame is, it doesn't make a difference. The point of Rabbi say is as follows: What happens if when going ahead and having the kavana for pigul, I have in mind that I'm going to consume that kizayis of sacrificial meat in 3 days from now, but I'm going to take my time eating it. I'm going to take a half hour to eat it. So let's say, I will say that it's clearly as, so say, just so you understand how this works. So the way it works, I will say, is as follows. If I go ahead and I eat a kizayis of chazer, but I eat it over an hour and a half, so I will say, I don't get malchus for that. Why? Because I will say, such a prolonged act of eating is not considered to be one cohesive act of consumption. Because of that, I'm not held liable. So also I said the shaila over here is, I have in mind to eat the kizayis of pigul, I have in mind to eat the kizayis of sacrificial meat, but I haven't on pigul or not. Mau, achilas gava midamin alei. Do we say, Rabosai, that sacrificial consumption is no different than any other consumption, and if you do it outside of the time of achilas pras, you're not chayiv? Oh, lachilas, excuse me, mao, lachilas gava medam. I'm sorry. Do we say, Rabbosai, that at the end of the day, so karbanos are in a different category of their own. Just like Rabbosai, when it comes to burning karbanos on the mizbeach, there's no amount of time that it has to be consumed by the fire. Right? In other words, however long it takes to burn, it takes to burn. 5 minutes or 25 minutes, it doesn't make a difference. So too, again, even if he has in mind to eat it outside of the shir of kedei achilas pras, it's still going to be pigul. Or do we compare carbonic consumption to ordinary consumption? Just like ordinary consumption is only considered to be a bona fide act of consumption if it happens b'chdei achilas pras, so too carbonic consumption is also only going to be prohibited if what? If it happens b'chdei achilas pras. But so look at Rashi just a moment. L'achilas gava midamin le'daha iskish le'in machshav achilas gava v'afkilas adna b'hadi adadi v'achilas gava af biyos b'chdei achilas pras. So you see again, when it comes to carbonic consumption, let's say on the altar, so on the mizbeach, it could take the carbon 25 minutes, or it could take the carbon 2 minutes to go ahead and be consumed by the fire. So Rabbi Tashma, Rabbi says, let's analyze this. Kosher. If a person has in mind to go ahead and eat the half a kizayis and to burn half a kizayis, Rabbi say kosher, which means, this is the Mishnah, those two half kizayis do not combine with each other to form a pigul prohibition. Because consumption and burning a carbon do not combine. So the reason they don't combine is because one is achila, one is burning. But I will say to you, to have a case of achila and achila comparable to a case of achila and aktara, it would work. So the Gemara says, I vaha haktara biyosim achilas prasu. So also remember again, the Gemara is suggesting if you find the case that is achila and achila, but similar to achila v'aktara, can work. Then I will say, by definition, haktara, anytime you're burning a carbon, I will say, that could always take longer than kedei achilas pras. So you see from here that's what? That even if you have in mind to go ahead and eat the carbon longer than the time that it takes to eat kedei achilas pras, that ultimately it could still result in a pigul prohibition, to which the Gemara says maybe not. Dilma behesek godol. We'll say ultimately again maybe not, because maybe at the end of the day you could be dealing with a very large fire. If it's a very large fire on the mizbeach, then what? Then ultimately again it could incinerate the carbon immediately, even less than kedei achilas pras. So we'll say the Gemara doesn't seem to resolve this. The Gemara seems to leave this question unanswered. That halacha l'maaseh, if a person had kavana to eat a kizayis of pigul, but yeser mechdei achilas pras, does that count as pigul or not? Gemara leaves it unresolved. Next, lechol kechatzi zayis olag kechatzi zayis kosher. So now, we'll say quoting the case from the Mishnah, person has in mind to eat a half a kizayis and to burn half a kizayis outside of the prescribed time, kosher, or as it does not create a pigul prohibition. So time of the lechol lahaktir, the reason is because you have in mind for half a kizayis to eat it, half a kizayis to burn it. Halechol v'lechol davar shein darko lechol mitztarif. But it will say, interestingly enough, if you were to have kavana for achila, even if it was for something that is not normally consumed, we actually spoke about this earlier, halacha l'maaseh that would be mitztarif, those would combine, and you could have a pigul prohibition. To which the Gemara says, hakatani reisha. But 1 second, what about the beginning of the Mishnah that said, lechol es shedarko lechol, so mitztarif es shedarko lechol in, she'in darko lo. We'll say, but from the beginning of the Mishnah, sounds like the only time you could have an issue of pigul is when we're talking about things that are normally consumed. But if something is not normally consumed, then halacha l'maaseh, it's not mitztarif to create a shear of prohibition. Rabbi Yirmiyah Haman. It will say, whose opinion does this reflect? Rabbi Eliezer, Dara mechashven me'achilas adam la'achilas mizbeach. U'ma'achilas mizbeach la'achilas adam. We'll say, this is the sheet of Rabbi Eliezer, who we've learned already a number of times, who says that we make a linkage between what we'll call carbonic consumption and human consumption. That ultimately, again, whether something is consumed by people or consumed by the altar, we allow those items to be mitztarif. We allow those items ultimately to be combined. In other words, according to Rabbi Eliezer, the umbrella of consumption covers all forms of consumption, be it human consumption or alter consumption. This nan, because also we learned in the Mishnah, hashochet es hazevach, if one shechted a carbon, le'echol davar shein darko le'echol, ulahaktir davar shein darko lahaktir kosher. So the Mishnah said as follows: if a person goes ahead and shechts a carbon, and they have in mind to eat something that is not normally consumable, or to burn something that is not normally burned, and let's say they have an erroneous mindset by one of these items, so we'll say, so the Rabbanon say kosher, it doesn't invalidate the carbon. We'll say the Rabbanon are of the opinion that, let's say, for example, you have in mind to eat something outside of the prescribed time that is not normally eaten, it's normally burned, or you have not create a pigul prohibition. The only time you can create pigul is when you have in mind to eat something illegally that is normally consumed, or you have in mind to burn something illegally that is normally burned. Rabbi Eliezer posel, and Rabbi Eliezer says that's still the carbon posel. Why Rabbi saying? Because Rabbi Eliezer says anything that when we say eaten, that refers to anything that's eaten by a person or eaten by the mizbeach. When we say, so we'll say, so therefore, Rabbi Eliezer says consumption is anything that is either consumed by people or consumed by the mizbeach. Therefore, if you have a disqualifying thought, a pigul thought, by anything, either that's consumed by a person or by the mizbeach, that invalidates the carbon. Abaye says, Afilu Timur Rabbanon. Abaye says, the truth is, it can even reflect the view of the Rabbanon. How so? V'lo tema ha'le'echol davar she'in darko le'echol. We'll say, don't say over here that this ultimately again refers to eating a half a kizayis of something that is not normally consumed. Ela ima ha'le'echol v'le'echol davar she'darko le'echol. See that the Rabbanan are also referring to what? Something that is normally consumed. If that's the case, or half a kizayis is normally consumed. If that's the case, my kamash, so if we're talking about over here of eating 2 half kizayis of something that is normally consumed, and the Gemara is telling me that it's mitzaref, what's the chiddush? My kamash malon. Eat davar. Listen to this. Eat davar shedarko le'echol kamash malon mireisha. So I'll say if it's something that is normally consumed, then ultimately again we can learn this from the Reisha. Shema mina kechatzi zayis b'chutz kechatzi zayis lemachar pasal. Then I will say that what? If a person has in mind a half a kizayis ultimately again to be eaten outside of the prescribed area, and another half a kizayis to be eaten outside of the prescribed time, that ultimately again the carbon will be pasal. Ha kechatzi zayis lemachar pigol. Elo ilecho ulahaktir midukya dereisha shma mina. Rather, I will say ultimately again, if you want to tell me that it's a case of where he has in mind for a half a kizayis to eat and a half a kizayis to burn, ultimately again, I could learn that out from a diuk in the Reisha. Le'echol davar shedarko le'echol in, shein darko le'echol lo. We'll say, what's the diuk I would make? That I'm only chayiv for what? If I have kavanah for something, for achila, right? Something that is normally consumed, yes, but something that's not normally, but something that is not normally consumed. Le'echol davar shein darko le'echol mitztaref. So we'll say, if I have in mind for something, for lechol, I will say if I have in mind to eat 2 things, and even if what, but if one of them is not normally consumed, then what I will say? Those things, 2 things are not mitzaref. Lechol lahakti by. So we'll say if I have in mind to eat something, if I have an erroneous mind for something that's normally consumed, together with something that's not normally consumed, and those 2 things are not mitzaref, then what Rabbi is saying? Lechol lahaktim boy. Supposed to then it goes without saying that what? To have kavana for half a kizayis for something that's normally consumed, and another half a kizayis something that's normally burned. That those 2 things aren't mitzaref. That's obvious. In other words, that if I can't be mitzaref 2 things that I can eat, when one of them is not normally consumed, they don't form a kizayis of prohibition. Then certainly again, when I have a half a kizayis something that's consumed, together with a half a kizayis something that's normally burned, of course those things won't be mitzaref either. To which the Gemara says no. So I'll say, I'll tell you why. To tell me the case, I will say the half a kizayis is something that's consumed, together with a half a kizayis is something that's burned. I might have thought that I will say that those 2 things can form a kizayis of prohibition. I'll tell you why. Sakadai tchamina. So I would have thought as follows: Hasam hu delav ki archei kamechashev. See, I will say, I might have thought that I will say in the following. In a case where you have a half a kizayis of something that is normally eaten, together with a half a kizayis of something that's not normally eaten. So I understand why what? Why what? Those two half kizesim can't combine to form a kizayis of Isser. Why not, Rabosai? Because if something is not normally consumed, it cannot form together, it cannot combine together with the half a kizayis that is normally consumed to form a kizayis of Isser. However, Aval Holcha Rabosai, watch this. But if I have a half a kizayis of a food item which is normally consumed, and a half a kizayis of a carbonic item which is normally consumed on the mizbeach, I might have thought that what? I might have thought those should combine. Why? De bahai ki orchei, o bahai ki orchei, ema litztarif. See, Rabosai, I might have thought that those two items can combine. Why? Because they're both being consumed, albeit what? Albeit what? In different ways. One is consumed by a human being, one is consumed ultimately by sacrificial fires, but lemaisa, again, the common denominator is they're both subject to consumption, albeit different forms of consumption. One human consumption, one altar consumption, but I might have thought that lemaisa, half a kizayis of each of those can combine to form a kizayis of prohibition. Kamash malon, no. Therefore, I will say the Gemara teaches us that this indeed is not the case, and therefore, again, I will say if a person had kavana for a half a kizayis of food that is normally consumed by a person had a machshavas pigel by half a kizayis of carbonic food that is normally consumed by a person, another half a kizayis of carbonic food that is consumed by the mizbeach, those two half kizayisim do not combine to form a kizayis of pigel and make the person liable to a pigel machshava, even though again they are both consumed, because they are not consumed. So Rabosai, bottom line, what it comes down to is half kizayisim only combine if they are consumed in the same way, in other words, by human beings. Then ultimately, again, they could combine to form a kizayis of pigel. Otherwise, they do not go ahead and combine to create a pigel prohibition. Hadron Allah kal Zevachim shekiblu daman. Stop over.